Fantastic. All right, hope you all enjoyed that panel. I know I did. It's really cool to be able to hear from some of the internet's most brilliant minds. Actually, all of the internet's most brilliant minds are gravitating toward Web3. That is where everybody is coming. That is where the next iteration of the web is happening in real time. And I'm not going to take too much time because I do want to get into this next panel right away. Speaking of brilliant minds, the topic that we're going to transition to is, like we were discussing before, the tech is ready. We're now in a period of consolidation as we kind of figure out what's next and the implementation of that tech and how to attract those users into this amazing, magical world, right? So our next panel is going to be focused on a fireside chat, actually, the road to mass adoption, decentralized ID. And we have some powerhouse speakers. We've got Terence, the founder of Humanity Protocol, and Yat Siu, the founder of Animoca Brands, moderated by Gareth Jenkinson, managing editor at Cointelegraph. Please give it up or a round of applause for them.
Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you, Megan.
Jenkinson, I'm the managing editor of Cointelegraph. It's a great pleasure to be with you this morning. We've got 20 minutes to chat about this topic today, and we could probably speak about it for an hour. Obviously, decentralized ID is becoming increasingly important as people around the world become a lot more critical about the state of the internet. We've got a handful of big institutions, the likes of Google's and Facebook, controlling users' data, and blockchain technology is really challenging the status quo. So I'm joined by Yat and Terence today, two great thought leaders in the space, and probably two people that can speak to quite different elements of decentralized identity. Terence, I think we're going to start with you because obviously WorldCoin has had its naysayers over the years, and you're obviously the founder of Humanity Protocol. You have a different approach. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on how you went about creating this protocol, what is different, and what people stand to gain from what you're doing.
Sure. So just a little bit about Humanity Protocol. You know, what we're trying to build is way beyond what WorldCoin is trying to do. I think there's sort of an element of comparison because we're also sort of starting with biometrics.
Yes.
There's proof of personhood. But ultimately, what we're trying to build is almost an open identity graph for the Web3 space, for the internet, because we think identity is important. It's important that you actually own your own data, you own your own identity. And what we're doing is we're starting with what we call proof of humanity. And the whole idea is to slowly and gradually move it to sort of proof of human identity, right? And with proof of humanity, we think it's important because right now, with the proliferation of, artificial intelligence, bots, it's important that we are able to actually differentiate whether an account or a digital identity that you're interacting with is a human being or not. Yeah. It used to be the case that passing a KYC means you're a human being. What we're seeing now with deepfake technology, with people being able to generate all sorts of fake passports, IDs, and whatnot, we think that's not enough. And ultimately, we need something that's immutable from a human being, and biometrics is one way to go. And what we're trying to do is say, historically, I think identity has been one of the key use cases that people talked about as being very fit for blockchain. Yep. Probably even back during the ICO days in 2017, but it's never really been able to take hold. And we think there are a couple of reasons, but primarily because it's too early. And we think actually now is the time because there's a lot more people, a lot more users in the Web3 ecosystem. There's sort of a key use case and product market fit for anti-civil. And that could be a launch pad for a lot more in the identity realm.
Yet you've got a slice of the pie of Humanity Protocol. What made you interested in what Terence and his team are doing?
Well, I mean, first, Animoca has always been about proliferating sort of the idea of owning your digital property rights, and what is more important than owning your identity in terms of the ultimate form of property, right? And I think the construct here is around building a reputation layer. So when you think in Web3, everyone wants to stay still somewhat anonymous in a way, in terms of they don't want to share everything. One of the problems that we have in Web2 is that, sure, we might trust Google and Facebook to say something about us, but then they own all your data. And then what happens is that they do all sorts of things with the data that generates value for them without our permission, right? But Humanity Protocol does in conjunction with other ID infrastructure. So they would provide, from our perspective, the verification tools, and the way they do it with the reading of the palm is one that you can constantly also verify it over time. One of the problems we have in gaming, for instance, when we do KYC of wallets to allow people to buy our assets, is that those wallets end up being sold to others, right? Some person goes in and does a KYC, and then suddenly we have a whole bunch of people from Russia that suddenly have the ability to like mail.ru email addresses. We're like, wait, we didn't allow that. But that's because basically it just gets sold on. Identity theft as well, all that kind of stuff. So you have to be able to verify that. And one of the problems that we saw with solutions like WorldCoin, which was a first approach, was sure, it can prove a certain part, but how convenient is it for you to re-verify that proof?
Yes.
I mean, think about how often you have to verify your KYC. It's much easier to do it with your palm than it is to do with your eyes, because you have to go somewhere and sort of do that. And then when you think of how do we sort of build a reputation layer? Well, if your identity can't be proven because it can always be moved around or can be swapped or traded, then how do you build an actual solid reputation layer? And so for Mochaverse, that's what we're trying to build. But we need a technology that allows you to verify who you are on a regular basis, and Humanity Protocol is an ideal solution. When you think about the kind of value that you give to an end user that has done something because they have a good reputation, this could be rewarded in the form of NFTs or in terms of airdrops or tokens, right? That's actually really powerful. But I want to know that you are who you really are, right? And maybe in the first few months, I know who you are. But then 6 months later, do I really know who you are? And then building the reputation on top of that requires this type of technology. So yeah, I think it's really critical technology, and one that can be owned by the end user.
Obviously, we've seen this pushback against WorldCoin in different jurisdictions in the world, and they're two very different things. But what is the main barrier in your mind, Terence, to get someone to be like, I'm ready to do this now? I'm ready to use my biometrics, my palm, and this to constantly prove my personhood. Is there still this element of lack of trust in the technology itself that is this barrier for people to actually use this?
I think we've actually been running sort of a private testnet for the last couple months. Whether it's investors, friends, have been playing around with it. I mean, Yat's palm is scanned, and what we're seeing is that even some people I've spoken to who have been pretty resistant to doing the iris scan are a little bit more open to this, simply because I think it is a little bit less dystopian. It's less invasive. And then, the way we're building this out is we're leveraging software. There will ultimately also be a hardware piece where it adds more accuracy to it. But we think the fact that you don't have to go line up in front of a mall, look into this, circular round orb thingy, makes it a lot easier, right? And it's also something that you see already in, you see this technology being used, for example, in Japan, for the last probably decade and a half with a lot of the big banks for KYC and verification. ATMs use this. We're seeing in China, Tencent's using this for payments with WeChat Pay. In the US, Amazon is using this for payments with Whole Foods, right? So we do think this is probably a lot more accepted. And I think one of the big pushbacks also for WorldCoin, at least from my understanding, was that iris is ultimately, let me put it this way, biometrics, it's not rocket science, it's pattern matching, right? Iris is one of those things where it's really hard to train when it comes to machine learning models because it's hard to collect samples. And so my understanding was that, at least in the beginning with WorldCoin, what they were doing was they were technically identifying you, but they were also keeping the raw data and using that raw data to go improve their models, right? So it's almost like a bait and switch element in there. Whereas for us, when we have a team on board that's been working on this for the last 10 years. They've done sort of sample collection for the longest time, and so when it comes to us implementing this technology, we're not taking any videos, we're not taking any photos. It's really just extracting patterns, turning it into essentially a signature, encrypting it so that it's not reversible and it's completely secure and safe.
And maybe just to add to that, I think this is what government's perspective is most worried about, which is privacy data about individuals, about their citizens, who owns it and what do they do with it. I mean, if you think about all of the concerns that Europe has, for instance, around what the big Web2 giants do with the data, there's all this policing and there's all these regulations. Of course, the regulations didn't end up doing what they hoped they would do. It ended up creating barriers for smaller players to enter. But here, if it's your data and you can actually sovereignly prove that nobody else has access to it, and also prove that actually humanity itself doesn't use the data in ways that are sort of inappropriate or without permission, or they don't even have that data, then I think it will remove many of the concerns that governments have around the world, because that's the point. It's just like, okay, you don't know anything about this. You can just prove and verify with zero knowledge proof, essentially, that this is the real person in question, but you don't have the data, which preserves the privacy and protects essentially the rights of the citizens. And I think that's actually really the key here.
In terms of like a killer use case, I mean, obviously you're using it for your Web3 games to help you KYC gamers and that sort of thing. Terence, like, what is your long-term vision for what Humanity Protocol can do, and similar protocols as well that are obviously using this technology to give people ownership of their data and be able to prove personhood for a variety of different things? I mean, it kind of seems like the sky is the limit, right? It could be a very, very important tool going forward.
It could be a very important tool, right? Because if we think about at least looking at the Web3 space, I think one of the key very first use cases, we're already working with, planning to work with a lot of projects on airdrops, right? We announced a partnership with Layer Zero a couple weeks ago. They obviously Brian was going through this whole anti-Sybil thing. A lot of projects are going to start looking into this because ultimately, when you look at rewards for airdrops or rewards for games, in the traditional world, this is customer acquisition cost, right? And you don't want to be wasting a lot of money giving it to farmers. I mean, a lot of the tokens are sort of created for these projects, but ultimately, you don't want to give it to a farmer that's controlling 10,000 accounts and just dumping it on day one on real users, right? So that's at least in the Web3 space, we think that's one immediate use case. And
it's a big problem, right? I mean, like I saw some tweets last week about some of the Sybil accounts that are there, and it's like 10 to 50,000 accounts controlled by one person, in different spheres.
100%, right? And then when we look at sort of in the Web3 space, we do think that when we add in other attributes onto Humanity Protocol down the road, then this becomes useful for even enterprise DeFi, RWA initiatives, because there could be an element where you could securely prove that you are not an American citizen, or you're an accredited investor, or you're not from a sanctioned country, to different sort of dApps that might want to make use of this information, right? And then when we look at the sort of Web2 space, or just generally the internet, because of AI, because of bots, because of a lot of these technologies, we actually think much of the Web2 business models are going to get disrupted. When we think about sort of the big tech, your Facebooks, your Googles, your Instagrams, historically, it's people creating content and then people consuming content, and then advertisers are paying because they get to slip in their stuff so that they get the attention of people. Yes. Right? That's literally the hundreds of billions of dollars that are being generated a year. We actually think that's kind of at risk because now a lot of the content is not created by people. A lot of the accounts consuming this content are also not people. Yeah. Right? And so advertisers are spending a lot of money, a little bit like projects that are trying to airdrop. They're spending a lot of money on click fraud.
Yeah.
right?
They're getting ragged.
And so it's important for us to be able to say, hey, you know what? We're actually advertising to the person because that's where there's only value, right? Toyota spending money and selling cars to a bot, it's all wasted. So we think this becomes more and more important. And then when we look at the identity piece, also, again, looking at Facebook, LinkedIn, a lot of the information is fake. People are creating sort of botted accounts. So having the ability to actually verify this is real will become super important and serves as sort of infrastructure for the next set of apps to be built, whether it's in the Web3 space or even in sort of the centralized internet world.
Do you see this plugging into like Web 2 yet? Instead of like log in with Google, log in with Facebook, log in with log in with whatever Humanity Protocol or whatever other.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that we see it is that Humanity Protocol essentially provides the infrastructure for different DID systems around the world to basically implement and support that. So I think the future won't be a single DID platform. What I actually think will happen is that everyone will have various versions, like whether it's Mochaverse or whether it's an ENS, they'll have ways in which they want to verify their sort of humanity, and they need a technology that can prove that. And we'll always build reputation layers as we do in the physical world also. Like for instance, we have maybe a different reputation at work as we have with our family, as we have with maybe our alumni, right? So we might want to isolate those reputation networks away from the rest of the reputation network, because that makes sense. So you still have to prove that you're that same human across the system, right? Nobody would doubt that, say, Gareth at Cointelegraph is not the same Gareth who's with his mom, right? They know exactly that you're the same person, but you might act differently and you might have a different reputation structure there. Yeah. So I think people are going to log in with their identity. So the way that we think of it, basically from a self-custody aspect, you log in our case, we'd have a soul-bound NFT that becomes a container of your digital identity, verified on a regular basis that he's human through something like Humanity Protocol, and then people plug in. And the permission on that plugin also becomes the way that the end user gets paid. Because if I know that you are someone with a certain reputation and I can verify he's human, instead of paying Google and Apple, hundreds of dollars in advertising to try to reach that customer, I'm going to give it to you in hundreds of dollars of airdrops. Yep. And we see this happening already today with NFTs in a very crude way. Oh, you own a Bored Ape? Well, I'm going to give you a free airdrop because at least I know you're worth $50,000, right? In the same way that you would pay a certain amount of money to invite people who might own a Ferrari or who might own a Rolex watch, right? They have these soirees and they basically have an event and they have a gala. If you happen to own this fancy car, then you can come. Yeah. You'll attract them. And you don't pay them directly, but the value you paid for was actually quite expensive because you want to reach that customer. So we'll see that happening at scale. And this will totally, I agree with Terence, it will completely flip the advertising world upside down because the platforms will get completely disintermediated. I mean, in some ways, what the internet has done was disintermediate middlemen. And so the ultimate middlemen that are being disintermediated in Web3 are actually the Web2 middlemen, meaning the ones who provide advertising, the platforms, the Apples, the Facebook, the Googles of the world.
And just to add to that, you were asking about in terms of the Web 2 world, right? I was reading online a couple weeks ago, and there was a tweet where somebody was like, "What makes you human?" And then somebody responded, picking out traffic lights, because when we look at even just something as simple as CAPTCHAs, it's absurd that now you have to pick traffic lights, pick buckets out of images, and do math formulas, all that sort of stuff, just so we can use applications. Yep. So also, beyond the airdrop piece and whatnot, in the Web 2 world, I think even as an infrastructure, one of the key products that we're building out is something that would potentially replace this.
Yeah. When it comes to what you've built and getting it out there now, having seen what happened with WorldCoin, was it ever in the back of your mind that I'm a bit worried or I need to actively engage with regulators or governments about what I'm doing? I mean, you've quite clearly explained that the infrastructure itself does not take a photo of your palm and store that. It's recognizing the patterns. But do you feel that you need to actively go and have proactive conversations in order to do what you're doing and not worry that someone's going to be like, hey, stop that, we don't like it?
I do think we should actively engage with regulators. We do speak to them. I think the key piece with WorldCoin was, a lot of times I also think, when it comes to regulation and sort of people getting in trouble, it's sensational. So there's that. So don't just try to keep your head down and really build and provide products and services that people want, then that's that. But then, one of the key things is really not misusing data. I think the most important thing is for us to just make sure that's
And I
the
mean,
case.
probably some of that like kickback from regulators and stuff is just we don't understand this, so like let's rather be overly cautious here and do something, right? I mean, that's been my view of what's happened with WorldCoin around the world. It's just like, we don't like what you're doing, we don't quite understand what you're doing with people's data, so rather just stop, But these solutions, the technology is developing, it's definitely seeming like things are going in that direction. I mean, I'm curious, anyone here, would you use Humanity Protocol and scan your palm, put up your palm so I can see? Okay, like, what is that, like a third of the room, maybe?
But maybe I'll pose a different question. Would you rather, for sort of every time you use an application, doesn't matter what application, would you rather solve a complex captcha every single time, or simply just show up your palm?
Palm? Yeah, okay, more people put up the palm. So that's a great one. I mean, I had to do that this morning on Twitter. I had to listen to some cat sounds, and it was 2 people going meow, and then a cat making the meow, and like pick the cat sound.
They're doing sounds now. Wow,
yeah,
okay.
it was quite weird. I did it, and it happened. But yeah, I would much rather just be like, very quickly.
And I just want to add, the way we're building this out right now as we speak, right, the capture product, is not to say that every single time you go through a website or app, you have to do it.
Yes.
It's ultimately up to the application where they want to say, hey, you know what, you've done it once with this account, then it's good. Or, you have to do it in different sort of intervals, maybe once a month or whatever it is, right? So, yeah, I mean, now the CAPTCHA stuff is getting pretty absurd.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the first things.
We
that
need
we're
better
solving,
solutions. Terence, Yat, thank you so much for your time. Fascinating conversation. I wish we had more time to chat about it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gareth.
This one, right? Drivers for crypto adoption.